Hi, this is Teddy. Today's episode is about Alaska. Here's some facts about Alaska. The capital of Alaska is Juneau, and the largest city is Anchorage. Alaska is the largest state by area, but it's 48th by population, with around 750,000 people. The governor of Alaska is Independent Bill Walker. The senators are Republicans, Lisa Murkowski and Dan Sullivan. Alaska sends one representative to the U.S. House of Representatives, a Republican.
Are you la listening?
Hey everybody, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics. I am super excited in this episode to be talking about the politics of Alaska. I've been looking forward to this one for a while. And with me to talk Alaska politics is Casey Steinau, who is the chair of the Democratic Party in Alaska. Hi, Casey.
Hi, Kelly. I'm really excited to be the other broad on the line today.
Excellent. So before we jump into the craziness of Alaska politics, could you give us just a brief little intro for sort of who you are and your background in politics?
Sure. So, as you said, I'm the chair of the Alaska Democratic Party and also fortunate to be on the executive committee of the DNC, so that helps us spread the Alaska way as I move forward with that organization. I primarily, with a long family background of politics, finally decided that I had to become involved at a more dramatic level. For a little background, I worked in Wasilla, Alaska, made famous by our former governor and crazy person. And during the 2008 presidential election, so Obama was moving forward, and of course, things were a little crazy here, and I noted that my neighbors, people around me, were scared to put Democrat signs in their yards. Their cars were being keyed. Progressives were like, "Oh, I can't drive through Wasilla with a Democrat sign on my bumper sticker," but it was okay to have a white supremacist sign, and that was considered socially acceptable, but somehow to be something as basic in America as a Democrat was no longer okay, and I just had enough with that, and that kind of projected me into the role that I have. I kind of worked my way through the party as a district chair and a regional chair and a state vice chair, and ultimately I was just reelected for my second term as the chair of the party in May, and super, super excited to do it. It's a really exciting time in politics, and here in Alaska, I know it's really a cliche, but things are just a little different here, so I'm happy to be involved.
So one of the ways that things seem to be a little different in Alaska is the high number of undeclared or independent, both voters and candidates. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that and the nuance that brings to the campaigns and the races.
Sure. So, in a lot of states, you don't even actually technically register as a party, but in ours you do. And there are two different ways one can run, as you alluded to. One is that we call them a U, which is an undeclared, and an N, which is nonpartisan. So when I talk about, quote, independent voters, those are the people I'm talking about. Ironically, we also have an independence party here, which is the Alaska Independence Party, those who would choose Alaska to no longer be a state. So there are many folks, sadly, who think that they're registered as an independent, and in fact they are Alaska Independents. That's who they're registered with. So that's always kind of funny. But in that U's and N's category, it ranges from about 53 to about 56%, depending on when you take a look at the numbers. So certainly a majority of the population is registered to vote, but not registered with a specific party. So that's really interesting. And so about 2 years ago, our leadership decided, and by that I mean our state central committee, so our statewide leadership, decided that we wanted to engage a higher percentage of the population, and by that we wanted to engage that 53 to 56% of people who are registered not with a party. To take a step back, our primary, the Democratic primary, is a completely open primary, which means anyone can vote in our primary, be it a Democrat, a Green, a nonpartisan, a Libertarian, or a Republican for that matter. They can only pick one ballot, but they can certainly vote in ours. So we were already open to the voters. And so we thought, okay, well, let's open this up a little bit more to the candidates. And instead of creating these crazy three-way races where there would be a Democrat but then also a progressive who was registered as an N or a U, and for whatever their reason, they did not want to switch to a D. Some of them felt it was not true to their character or who they really were. And so they kind of were left without an infrastructure to help them, a support group to get elected. And so we said, hey, let's open it up. Let's let these folks run in our primary. And if the Democrats and the folks who vote in that primary feel like this is who we want to represent us, regardless of what the letter is behind their name, then that's who should represent us. And so we put that forward, and the state appealed it. And said, no, you can't do that. And so we took it to court, and we won. And then the state appealed it again, and we took it to court, and we won. And then the state appealed it again, and we took it to court, and we won at the Alaska Supreme Court. And they said, we're not sure what you're doing, but we believe that you have the freedom of association, and if that's how you choose to do it, then that's how you choose to do it. So this election coming up in November will be the very first opportunity that we have to do that kind of a thing. And in fact, our candidate for the House of Representatives, the federal, Alyse Galvin, is running in that exact position. She ran not as a Democrat, but rather as a nonpartisan, and won handily across the state by Democrats and people voting in our primary to represent us, and that's where we're going forward, as well as a number of our candidates at both the state House and Senate level.
All right. And of course, Alaska is the only state in the country currently that has an independent governor, which is
correct.
Very unusual.
Yeah, and he, again, that's an even more interesting situation because his lieutenant governor is a Democrat. And kind of the way that happened was Byron Mallott was the Democratic candidate for governor, and Bill Walker was running as a kind of a nonpartisan, or independent rather. And we realized that at the point neither one of them was going to win, and we were going to have Sean Parnell, who, among other things, said we are not going to expand Medicaid, and he was a hardcore conservative. And so there is an opportunity, kind of a small window after the primary, once it's certified, where a state party, and only if you're in a party, has the opportunity to do a switch. And so Byron came to us and said, I want to combine here. And so what we did is we withdrew Byron and our lieutenant governor candidates, and Bill Walker withdrew his lieutenant governor and then replaced his lieutenant governor with our governor candidate, and they ran on a ticket and won.
That's wild.
Yeah, it was wild. And we were able to expand Medicaid, which is great. Now, fast forward 2018, and unfortunately, Bill Walker and Byron Mallott, they had announced that they were going to run in our primary because we went through this whole scenario with the Supreme Court, right, so that could happen. And so they came to our convention, and they said, yes, we're going to run in the primary, and it was very exciting. And then our former U.S. Senator, Mark Begich, decided to go into the race, and so Bill Walker felt like he couldn't beat him, and so he did not run in our primary. And so now we are left with a three-way race, being Mark Begich as the Democratic candidate, Mike Dunleavy, who is super right-wing conservative, as a Republican, and then in the, as we call it, a petition candidate, in other words, they had to get signatures, is Bill Walker.
And then you also have this weird thing going on in the Alaska House with, I believe, the Republicans technically have a majority but don't actually have control?
So what we have, yes, exactly. We have in our House of Representatives, we have what we call a bipartisan coalition, essentially. And so we have, absolutely, a minority number of Democrats currently, although we believe we will change that in November, and 2 independents, as we're going to call them on this call, nonpartisans, and then 3 Republicans. And together they combined to be the majority. So it's a bipartisan coalition. We did this in the Senate about a decade ago, and it was very, very effective. Again, it was the same kind of numbers, but it works really, really well, and it's a way that we actually get things done in the state. People are willing to work across the aisle. I think it might just be that we come from this incredibly small population. I mean, we are geographically the largest state.
By a lot.
Yeah, by a lot, exactly. But we are, as a population, one of the smallest. And so, no matter where you go, somebody's cousin. So I think part of it is that our people, when they go down to Juneau, when they're in our capital and they're working together, I think they perceive each other as perhaps people a little more and less just as party labels. And I think, that's the way that we do it. And so we were able to get that coalition together, which is very, very exciting. And as a result, when we flipped the House leadership, we, first of all, we put in the first Alaska Native ever to be the Speaker of the House, which is extremely exciting, Bryce Edgman. And we were the only state in the country in the 2016 election to flip a chamber and go for Trump. So that was pretty exciting.
Yeah, that is exciting.
We're trying to work a little bit out of the box. A ridiculously oversaid quote, but.
So you talked about this enormous size of this state. What kind of challenges does that present to political organizing, both for candidates but also then for the party?
Well, let's start with the candidates. So, for example, I was traveling out in the rural Alaska this last week, and to get from, let's say, Bethel to Good News Bay, which is not that far geographically, it's an hour flight. There's no roads, right? Or you cannot go from village to village to village to village in a car. You can sometimes do it on a four-wheeler in the summer, but the tundra is very wet, and that's not an easy thing. It's not like it's a straight line. You can do some travel via boat to get from community to community in the summer, but primarily the way that you would have to get from village to village to village to village is by airplane, and that is incredibly expensive. Also, to get from some of those to each other, you have to come to Anchorage and then fly back, which is even more crazy. So to try and just get what we call, boots on the ground is very difficult. So we really have to rely on folks within communities to do that work. And we just continue to try and build the infrastructure through the party to help the candidates. Now, if you take, District 6, for example, and that's, we have a candidate, a wonderful Alaska Native gentleman named Ed Alexander is running up there. And that's not all the way up on the northern slope, but it's geographically larger than many, many, many states. And I believe it's the largest House district in the United States, geographically. The sizes are they're almost incomprehensible.
What are some of the things that people are really concerned with right now? Some of the issues and things that people are really agitated about or really want to make sure that they get the right people in office to try to solve?
Well, I think it depends on which kind of races you're talking about. I think certainly at the national level, healthcare continues to be a huge, huge concern for people. As I said, we did Medicaid expansion here, and the Affordable Care Act just wasn't as affordable as we had thought up here on some things. And so making sure that people are not losing their health care, I think, is absolutely paramount in our candidates as we talk to them. Followed probably immediately in the state by education. Our graduation rates are low, and we really, really need to increase those. And then the violence against women in Alaska, our statistics are off the chart. You know, there's some things you just don't want to be number one in, and we are definitely there. That comes with a combination of lack of police powers out in the villages and a lot of other things. We need a lot more treatment of mental health to help folks get through that, both as victims of such things, but also just in general, our mental health is terrible as far as treatment goes. And this kind of connects back with what we're talking about our vast distances. To try and get help is very difficult when you have to get on a plane. I was on a plane with a woman who has cancer the other day, and she had to get on a four-wheeler and get to the airport. And when I say airport, I mean a landing strip. And then she had to have somebody come with her, and then they had to get on a plane, and they had to fly to Bethel for an hour and a half, and then they had to stay overnight just to get treatment so that she can then get back on an airplane and fly back home. And that's just for basic treatments. When she starts getting into some of the more intensive treatments, that involves then another flight to Anchorage for many days. So the distances affect us in a multitude of ways. Even in education, imagine that your daughter is a high school volleyball player. If she's going to play volleyball against another high school, she's going to get on a plane every time, or somebody's going to fly to her.
Yeah, that's wild to imagine.
And costly.
Yeah. Are there other things that you want to make sure that people know about Alaska?
Well, I want people to know that we are not a bright red conservative state. We are definitely a purple state, and we are continuing to shift from one to the other. Let me give you an example. Wasilla, Alaska, as we discussed, which we know is a very, very red, historically, community. Well, in the region there, our school board, and by that I mean that region is the school board region, we've always been able to elect people kind of cross districts, so if you were in a region, you could vote for a school board member kind of no matter where you were. It didn't matter. Well, that was changed, and so it was locked in geographically. So we had a school board candidate, 5-time school board candidate, long-term, loud and proud progressive Democrat who was running, and so she had to only run in that little narrow area of Wasilla. And she won, and she beat the pants off of her opposition. And just goes to show, I think, that our area is willing and almost open to electing progressives. The other thing is in our borough municipal elections across the state we had just a couple weeks ago, we overwhelmingly supported women. And that, I think, is really important, and I think it's going to show a trend, not just here but nationwide. And so we're very excited to be on the forefront of that and hope to continue that trend by electing, among others, Alyse Galvin as our next Congresswoman.
Yeah, and the recent polls look pretty good for Alyse.
Yeah, 4 points came out yesterday difference, and that's phenomenal. And her opponent is we really, really want to throw him a retirement party. He's been in office a very long time, over 40 years, and I listened to him in a meeting a few years ago stand up and proudly tell everyone that he's never touched a computer in his life. And how someone that's that disconnected. But the one thing I will say about him is, and I've said it for a while, is that he was Trump before there was Trump. And we need to get rid of those folks and put in people who are modern thinkers.
Well, our listeners should stay tuned for an interview with Alyse Galvin, who is fantastic, and with Liz Snyder, who is running in the State House, and she is also fantastic.
And I will, if I'm allowed to put in a plug,
sure,
that we are, as I said, a very small state. I talk to chairs in other states, and I hear their budgets, and my ears are just blown. So if you want to make a real difference, with a small donation. Our numbers are very small here, and the Alaska Democratic Party, alaskadems.org, would love your $5 donation anytime.
All right. Excellent. Well, Casey, thank you so much for speaking with me. Alaska is just fascinating, and it's one of the places I really want to try to get to soon. So
when are you coming?
It'd
Live
be a
broadcast.
long flight with my kids, but
It is, but
I think they'd love it.
Watch her sing with a smile like a pro.
Hi, everyone. This is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics. I'm here in this segment with Alyse Galvin, who's running for the at-large U.S. Congress seat in Alaska. Hi, Alyse.
Hi, Kelly. Yeah, we're one of the few states where our state is the district. So
Yes.
That's a number you need to remember.
So can you give us a little bit of background on who you are and what you've done before now, and then why you're running for Congress?
Yeah, well, my family came up working in World War II, serving to Alaska back in the early 40s, before Alaska was even a state. I'm a third-generation Alaskan, and I've spent my whole life considering how we can make sure Alaska is stronger and a better place for the next generation. And it really does come down to leadership. Over the last 5 years or so, I've been doing some work growing a group called Great Alaska Schools to advocate for public education for each and every child to have a quality public education. And that's certainly slipped from being on the front burner of our decision making by our policymakers. And so I grew a group from about 40 to 4,000 statewide and worked really hard to help ensure that we're getting what we need in terms of an adequate and predictable funding stream and just pulling people together. And so in that work, I worked in the capital in the state of Alaska, Juneau, along with in D.C. to do that advocacy work. And it became really clear to me that until we change up some of the people to better reflect our values as Alaskans, we are just not going to get where we need to go. And so with all of that, and I joined a group called Alaska Women Ascend, and it gave me the courage and the oomph I needed to step up and run for Congress.
All right. And so I think my biggest question for you is, how do you campaign in a district like this? So this is obviously not just the largest congressional district in the country, but the largest by like orders of magnitude.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, you get used to things like very small planes, big planes, small planes, boats, and every size boat I've been on, and an RV. And then when you have a really long trip and you want to save some money, it's my Prius. But tell you what, it's been a great adventure. It is a state. I assume that you have some understanding that it's twice the size of Texas and then some. And more importantly, it's not just that the state is so big, it's that people are living all over the state. And we're still 700,000 people, but we have clusters of 3,000 people in Nome, or 5,000 people in Kodiak, one of our over 1,000 islands. So it's really important that we recognize that if we're going to represent them, we need to be there. We need to be listening to their stories and their challenges and celebrating with them where they are strong and how they are strong. So I've been really fortunate to have this opportunity to meet with some of the most incredibly strong, vibrant people I've ever met in my life. It's been fantastic. And I can't wait to serve them. It's going to be amazing.
I saw at some point on Facebook that instead of going door to door, you were going tent to tent.
Oh, yeah. So in the summertime in Alaska, we all get outside. Not only do people leave the cities to go out to berry pick and fish and do things like that, most of them are, some of us have RVs and a lot of us have tents. We tent camped every summer with our 4 kids. It's just something that we do. And so when I was out in Hope, for example, it was it's a pretty small community, mostly centered. It used to be mining, and now it's mostly tourism. Well, a lot of families go out there and berry pick, and so I was out there meeting with at their community center, and it's a community of 100, just less than 200 people. But a lot of people were out camping, probably tripled the size of the community that summer. Anyhow, I did go tent to tent because I knew Alaskans were there camping, and if you want to talk to them, you need to go wherever they are. I also have been to Queeflik and Napaskiak, up and down river in right outside of Bethel, which is another hub kind of in the interior of Alaska. And again, if you want to talk to them, then you need to go to their fish camps. In their case, they have camps all along the rivers in the summertime. And they go and they catch their fish, they hang it up, and they make sure that they have enough for the winter. So in this case, I was able to do the same sort of visiting. Unfortunately, the fish camps were more like ghost towns at this time because the fish weren't running. We have a lot of issues around climate change. Anyhow, it gave me an opportunity, though, to go to the small communities and hear from them about their worries about that. And I'm really excited that I can get myself to these places because it's an all-in campaign. We have now champions in little communities like that. We have more than 750 volunteers, and it's really been a race like no other.
What are some of the things you're hearing from people as you go around and talk to them? What are the issues that they're really concerned with?
It depends on where I travel, but the overarching issues, kind of the broad ones, are public safety. People are worried for themselves. It's not that so much deep violence as much as people who are hurting. A lot of opioid epidemic issues that are causing theft and people to feel unsafe. And healthcare is another one. That's been huge everywhere, small business, large business. It's been a big deal when it comes to our economy growing or not growing. It's, in fact, the number one enemy to any new jobs is healthcare. That's something that we really need to get ourselves wrapped around. I have been meeting people telling me the most upsetting stories. I have met with elders who not only have Medicare and supplemental and even a pharmaceutical insurance plan, but they still can't afford the pharmaceuticals because they have to pay more than $400 a month for that. I mean, it's just been incredible. In Alaska, we're unique. We have really high healthcare costs that aren't just the highest in the nation. They're the highest in the world per capita. So part of that is the nuance of that having such a small population spread out. And some of it is that we don't have enough care providers. There's not a lot of competition. So anyway, healthcare has been a really big one that I've heard about. And jobs is another one. We have more than twice the unemployment than the lower 48 in Alaska. And in fact, in some regions, it's 3 times. I know in Bethel, it's almost 15%. So there's a lot of need for us to come up with ways for our youth to see a way to have a self-sustaining life.
So you are the mother of 4 kids,
Mm-hmm.
and we are very big proponents of having more moms in Congress. So I wondered if you could talk about sort of that, the perspective that gives you, having raised kids. I think your youngest just went off to college, and you know what you think that perspective brings when you get to Congress.
Yeah, so it brings everything. Anybody who is a mom or has ever had a mom gets it, that they have to keep a lot of pieces together. And also they need to know how to get things done, no matter what they're presented with. So there's a sense of resiliency that we understand, and also a sense of resourcefulness that we know really comes with motherhood. And I'm excited to be able to extend those skills beyond. My degree is in political science, but I'll tell you what, I mean, I have 4 kids. All of them are completely different. And in fact, my daughter is in the room right now. And I think it's important for us to know that this campaign has been one of those cases where I'm able to share the difference between myself and my opponent, who's served for just about half a century. He's 85, and I don't know that he remembers what it's like to walk your child to school, to really be a part of the community and what the price of milk is everywhere. I think it's important that we have somebody that's really connected to growing children here recently and to wanting to have that next generation have their jobs in their own community and stay in their community. To me, families staying together is everything, absolutely everything. And I think that Alaskans are appreciating having a candidate who values that. And so I'm really excited to be able to be that leader that can go to Washington, D.C. and say, hey, this is what it's like for families. And they need to know what it's like to be in the family. I'm running my whole campaign is with family. People see that I am still sticking with them all the time, and they really like that. It's been a really fun adventure for us all, and I think in serving, that will be what people will be most connected to because they know that I'm a real person, that I get it.
I love that on your website, each of your 4 children has their little bio up and, why they support you. I think that to me, as a mother, it really makes me feel connected. You're a real person who gets it, who understands what this life is like.
Well, it's ultimately, we have one thing we can do in life, and that's make sure that we leave this place with the next generation seeing a sense that it's still in order, that they've been given the skills and not just the critical thinking skills, but the kindness skills, the ability to work together skills that it's going to take to keep on for the next hundreds of generations. And I'm really excited that I'm able to bring that kind of thinking to the table and make sure that our policy making fits that. And I appreciate that you did look at the website. I'm proud of my 4 kids. Of course, we've been through ups and downs. I raised teenagers. I get it. I also had 3-year-olds, and I know what that's like. And I nursed all 4 of them. I know what that's like. It's one of those things where, again, I think it makes a difference that we have a leader who's of the people, someone who's been around that block and still with the energy and enthusiasm to bring that understanding and history of that to the table.
Is there anything else that you'd like to make sure that we talk about?
Our politics are different in Alaska, and I want to share just a little bit about that. Our state is 56% independent, 15% Democrat, 25% Republican, and then the rest are other things, including Green Party, Libertarian, and even Secession Party. Just sort of all kinds of different pieces. We're really independent in that way. So, and that's rough figures, but it's pretty much about that. And I'm independent. I have been for over a decade, and my values align. I'm very grateful that the Democratic Party in Alaska has sued to open the ballot in the primary, and I ran in it. I won handily. I think that it speaks to Alaskans that I am one who is willing to put my name out there early and put myself out there early, just who I am. And I stuck with that. A lot of people ask, well, why didn't you change your party given that? And it's because that's not who I am. I really believe we need to drop partisan battles to get things done. And that's really resonating well throughout the state. Everybody is so grateful to know that I'm looking at running a positive campaign, not just a positive campaign, but when I'm in office, people are going to hear about the wonderful Alaska that I know, the wonderful Alaskans that I know who can pull together and talk about an issue and resolve things like nobody else. And I don't know if it's because, we live in such a unique state with so many unique challenges when it comes to not just weather, but the animals that we live with. I mean, all of the things that we've been able to pull together around. But it's really important, I think, that we use that as a model for the rest of the nation. And I look forward to being that sort of a leader. I'm excited about what I'm seeing in the Senate, where we have women gather monthly, no matter what their party affiliation. They put things on the table. They find ways to talk about it and get things done. I think that's something that would be exciting for me to help work with in the House as well. I know we have, I think, 19.2% women in the House, and the House has, somewhere around 500, right? So it's going to be a lot, but still, we can do a lot if we can gather women together and others with like-minded thinking, that it's time for us to find what we have in common and start working on that civilly.
I love that. I've been advocating for a mom's caucus in Congress.
Yeah, love that. Right. And it's funny, in Alaska, that it's well known, not only in urban, but also in rural Alaska. It's the moms who get things done. and that's not to belittle, others, but I will say when push comes to shove, we just know how to get it done.
So if our listeners would like to help out your campaign, how can they do that?
Oh, gosh, I'm so glad you asked that. Yeah. So remember I said earlier, we are running this incredible campaign that really feels more like a movement because there have been so many involved in different ways. Well, there's, of course, go to the website. It's LisaForAlaska.com. And that's really a good spot to go. And then there's also another place where you can click on I want to help or volunteer. And you can volunteer from anywhere, any part of Alaska or any part of the nation. You can make calls and get engaged. And that's a really fun and easy way. It's very well designed to make it easy. And then there's also, of course, helping us get word out. We know this is going to be a very, very close race. In fact, he had 50.3% of the vote last time, 2 years ago, in a declining trend. 50.3. And we're looking at 2 candidates on the ballot. This is something that a lot of our nation's raters and other people haven't really appreciated, is the nuance of this race. Number one, I'm an independent for the first time ever who's run through the Democratic primary. And number two, there are only 2 names on the ballot, which has not been the case many of the other, in fact, in around a decade. And number 3, the fact that he's in a declining trend at 50.3 last time. So it's going to be very close, and any bit of help will help us. We need to particularly get our name out to the undecideds. We know that when they hear just a couple of sentences about me, they flip easily. So we've been putting a lot of effort into helping people understand that we need some help getting word out, not only by way of people making phone calls, but also mass media, and that's going to take money. And so I also encourage people to think about helping us get word out through radio, through television, and through digital. And those take a lot of money, although we're one of the least expensive races in the nation to flip. So that's exciting too. But we still have a ways to go to get enough. And it's a grassroots campaign. I am not taking a dime of corporate PAC money, not a dime, because I really believe that it's time to bring politics back of the people. And I think of all the messaging Alaskans are hearing, that's the one that resonates most. But we need everybody's help with that to make it of the people. So I encourage people to help us not only with their time, but with their treasure. That's really what it's going to take. We know, like I said, our polling says we can win this thing. Once they hear a little bit about me, we get there. And we've also had some huge opportunities with groups who have weighed in that have never weighed in against my opponent. And that's exciting. So groups like the NEA, in the primary, for the first time ever, they endorsed me. Planned Parenthood has endorsed me. Labor, I have, I think, more than half of labor unions who have endorsed me. And they have a lot of members in Alaska. I think we're one of the highest per capita membership in unions. So that's been really exciting to have their support as well. And many of them have endorsed Don Young in the past because he has done some things in the past, but lately he has not been there for the people of Alaska. And so anyhow, it's just been super exciting to see so many groups coming in, and I'm asking for others to join them because that's what it's going to take. It's going to be that close. Keep your mind on the number 50.3 and know we can do this with just a little more push.
Excellent. And we'll put a link to your website up on our website as well.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add one more thing if I could. A lot of people think that, if it's a grassroots campaign, that must mean that you're not really going to be able to do it because you're running against some guy who's been there for 45 years. Well, I just want the whole world to know this is not a grassroots campaign like anybody's ever seen before. We're talking about a campaign that has raised over $1 million from people with the average donation less than $20. I mean, people are weighing in on this one in ways that has never been seen in Alaska. I'm not sure about the rest of the United States, but we're really excited because we're not typically like that. We've had this guy doing the same old thing, getting his money from people from outside of Alaska. In fact, in this race, we already know by looking at the numbers that half of his money is from PACs, and of his money that's from people. The people, looking at the FEC, more than 2/3 of the people who have given to him live outside of Alaska. And that's pretty telling. Ours is flipped. We have the majority from Alaskans, and we're excited about that. We're excited to have others help in as well. But we're just, we know that this is the time. We're in a whole different place. And of course, I'm in a completely different campaign. People are so excited to see a candidate that it isn't a career politician. It's of the people. So the idea that I'm not taking a dime of corporate PAC money, like I say, it has been, to me, the most important message that the people of Alaska and others can hear, that I'm not in anybody's pocket. I'm in the people's pocket. So anyway, I'm just going to leave you with that and tell you I'm so grateful for you calling and letting me be a part of this. I can't wait.
Thank you so much. I know your campaign schedule is quite busy, so thanks so much for speaking with me, and I'm really excited about your race.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Nice meeting you. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Watch your seeds with a smile like
I am here in this segment with Liz Snyder, who is running for the Alaska House of Representatives in District 27. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me all the way from Alaska. So maybe to start, you could just give us a little bit of background about who you are and why you decided to run for the Alaska House.
Sure. Well, who am I? I am an educator. I'm a scientist. I'm a community organizer, but also a wife and mom, my two favorite jobs. I decided to run because it kind of felt like it was time to put up or shut up is one way to look at it. And, I've got two young boys, 5 and 7, and I really want to set a good example for them. I want to do right by them. And, Alaska's been so good to us. I feel like we're in a space to give back. So here I am.
All right. And you are an educator. Can you talk a little bit about what sort of education you work in?
Sure. So my background in terms of my own education is in environmental health and soil and water science. And I have been working as a faculty member at the University of Alaska Anchorage for about 10 years now. And we are a Master of Public Health program. And we are very focused on public health practice. So really working with communities, in communities on public health challenges that we identify together and we address together. And that's really given me an opportunity to travel all across the state, all the way as far north as you can go, up to Barrow, out to Nome, down to Cordova, and many communities, both urban and rural, in between. And that's afforded me the opportunity to meet so many different Alaskans and kind of learn more about the diversity of our hopes and our dreams and aspirations, but also our challenges. And I think that is going to be a really helpful perspective if and when I get to the legislature.
Yeah, so is District 27 in or near Anchorage?
It is. So it is in East Anchorage. We have a couple of districts over in this area. I could describe the cross streets, but I don't know how useful that would be to some of our listeners outside of Alaska. But we're a very urban district. We are what someone might nicely call an up-and-coming district. And we're pretty dense. Most of my district, unlike many others in the state, is walkable. So I've been able to do a lot of door knocking, just putting in the shoe leather, which has been great.
And so even though this is an urban district, and even though Alaska is actually not nearly as red as people might think, there's an incumbent Republican in this district currently.
That is correct. He has been in his seat since 2011. And in recent races, though, it's been pretty close. So we have every reason to be optimistic since we're pairing it with a lot of hard work. The last person who ran against him in the last cycle, I may not get the exact number right, but it was something in the neighborhood of 150 votes was the difference. And we need something in the neighborhood of 4,000 and something to win. So we are really focused, I think, as I mentioned before, on the door-to-door, making sure I'm getting the chance to talk with the vast majority of our voters here in our district and putting in that face time and making sure they know who the new gal is on the scene.
So as you're talking to all of these people, what are the kinds of things that they're concerned with? What are they talking to you about?
Sure. It's been pretty interesting and validating on some level. I have to say the reasons that inspired me to run, some of the specific issues, are the same thing I'm hearing at the doors. And it's not entirely unique to our district. These are some things that we as a state are dealing with and have been dealing with for some time. So on the top are our budget. We do have a pretty big budget gap, and we're going to have to get creative in how we're going to fill that gap. We hear a lot about crime and public safety. We've been experiencing increases in crime in recent years across the board. And we do have a recent piece of crime legislation that was pretty sweeping, took some pretty new ideas, some quote-unquote innovative approaches, trying to deal with our high recidivism rates and looking like we were going to need to even build a new penitentiary at the cost of millions and millions of dollars. And then the third one being education. We are not doing so great when it comes to student learning outcomes as compared to other states in the U.S. And it didn't used to be that way, and it doesn't need to be that way. So that is also something weighing heavily on the minds, particularly of parents and grandparents here in Alaska.
So I was looking right before we got on to talk at the makeup of the Alaska House right now, and I was shocked to realize that the Democrats actually had control in a little bit of a weird kind of way, that I guess there were more Republicans, but the Democrats had formed a coalition with some independents and some Republicans.
Yeah.
That's not at all what I think people would expect from Alaska.
No, and I think actually it had some really positive impacts this last session. So yes, you're right. We do have a bipartisan coalition. We do have a handful of legislators on the House side that are not part of that coalition, but there is a majority, and that has been very beneficial to getting some important pieces of legislation through, getting our budget through, making sure we're funding education. We got a pretty exciting healthcare bill through this past session. The same is not true in terms of the makeup on the Senate side.
Yeah, and so, I think a lot of people might look at races in Alaska and think, oh, why bother? There's probably so many Republicans, and that's clearly not true in the House. It seems like it's really important to support the Democrats who are running against incumbent Republicans, because a coalition made up of Democrats, Republicans, and independents seems like it could, theoretically fall apart, or one or two of those Republicans could lose. So, I think that makes it all the more important for races like yours to really be successful.
You are absolutely right. And that is certainly the conversation that we are having at the doors, at different events and functions. We want to preserve this bipartisan coalition because it really does It promotes compromise, it promotes collaboration, it promotes getting things done, and we would like to protect that. Me winning this district here in District 27 would be an additional step in that direction and preserving that coalition.
One of the things that I think is, of course, so unique about Alaska, and I've seen it come up a little bit on your website and your Facebook page, is the PFD. So can you talk us through a little bit what the PFD is, and then, what sort of thing you'd like to see happen with that?
Sure. So I'll give the real shorthand summary of the PFD, or the Permanent Fund Dividend. It's a uniquely Alaskan thing, and it's actually something that Alaskans are pretty darn proud of. It was a really forward-thinking mechanism that was put into place decades ago to make sure that income that we were generating as a state from the oil industry was being socked away, and that we were set up for maybe rougher days ahead. And what happens with that fund, the permanent fund, is we also earn interest on that fund. And each year, Alaskans who have been in the state at least a year and have maintained residency receive a payout, or a PFD as it's called in shorthand, each year. And it's a function of a particular formula that we work off of. And so it does vary somewhat from year to year, corresponding to past years of oil prices. And that fund and the fate of that fund is definitely a topic of conversation. It is a lot every year, but in particular this year, because we are still dealing with a budget gap. But we recognize that the PFD, it's important to Alaskans. The cost of living up here is quite a bit higher than other places. This is especially true for rural Alaska, where the cost of food and fuel and energy is exceptionally high. So we do have families who rely on this every year, and it is an annual injection of funding into our local businesses, into our local economy. So much of our Alaska economy relies on that injection of local funds every year.
There seems to be some discussions around what should be done with the PFD and if it should sort of remain in this fluctuating state. And, what are your thoughts about what should happen with that?
Sure. And different people will tell you different things. Some folks on the other end of the political spectrum are very, very protective and very vocal about having the highest PFD that current equation calculates. Most recently, it was looking like $3,000. And so that's one end of the spectrum. But in my mind, the math just does not add up now that we have falling revenue due to drops in oil prices. In my mind, that is not responsible. I would love for us, for families, to receive the highest PFD we can afford. But what is also now on the table, particularly as of last session, is a discussion of using a portion of the interest that is earned off of that permanent fund to fund government services, essential government services. So drawing sustainably from the fund. So it's replenished every year based on its interest earnings. But then we use some of those funds to support things like education and like public safety and infrastructure development. So that is a big focal point of conversation in this particular election cycle.
What does the makeup of the current state legislature look like in terms of men and women, in terms of, is this the kind of role that a lot of young parents go into, or is it more people who are older and retired from other positions? What does that look like in the current House and Senate?
Well, shame on me. I do not have the numbers pertaining to men versus women on the tip of my tongue. I have heard folks talking about it, and I believe if we elect all the women that are running this go around, we'll be hitting a pretty big milestone. But with respect to younger candidates and candidates with young families, we are seeing a new wave within recent years. Absolutely. I'm seeing that with some of my other fellow candidates in other districts, and we have a lot of back channel conversations around the challenges associated with campaigning and raising young children. But we're trying to be very intentional with making that possible and sharing with the broader public how we're making that happen. Because if we're going to be making decisions in the legislature that affect young families or affect younger voters who may soon be having young families, or even grandparents who are helping rear young families. We need that representation in the legislature. So I know, and I am not alone in this, but things as simple as hosting event fundraisers where childcare is provided. That is a standard thing for us. If we're having open houses or community listening sessions, trying really hard to do it at different times of day, in different places, recognizing that not everybody works the same schedule, that you may need to bring your children, and that's great. I bring my boys everywhere that I possibly can, partly because I need to sometimes, and partly because I feel like I want to show by my own actions that that's something that we need to just incorporate into politics if we want to see folks in my age bracket or younger running for these types of positions. And then we've been paying attention to some national headlines around the use of campaign funds for childcare. Because you are campaigning, you do need support in that arena. And we've made some inquiries on the state level on that subject, and that's something that our campaign is also doing as well.
Yeah, I saw a picture on your Facebook page, I think, of your younger son sacked out on the couch because he'd been out canvassing with you.
Yes, that was probably Deacon. He is my go-to wingman. He is always up for a door knocking sesh, for sure.
That's great. I think my 4-year-old might go along with that. My 7-year-old would probably just argue politics with people, so I don't think I'd bring him.
Oh yeah, my older one, he's also 7. It was cool the first few times, and now he's like, no thanks, Mom.
So tell me about this gorgeous tattoo that you have.
Oh, gosh. So I've got 2 of them on my forearm, and, we've just decided to be forward about that. We're not, no long sleeves for me. This is me. And there's 2 on the forearm, right? So one is a botanical illustration of an orange. I was born and raised in Florida originally, lived overseas for several years, but that's where much of my family still is. So that's my shout out to my home state. And then on the other side, which is more prominent on some of the photos, is a lingonberry or a lowbush cranberry, and that's something that you find in many places in Alaska. It's my favorite berry in Alaska, and that is in recognition of my adopted state.
That's beautiful. And it ties in then, too, with your interest in food and food policy. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It does. So my personal passion originally was food and gardening. And when I was still attending school, we started some local chapters focused on advocating for local food businesses and production. And then upon arriving in Alaska 10 years ago, I shortly thereafter got pulled into some food research looking at food systems of Alaska, challenges and opportunities. And I realized that I was very interested in that topic on a professional level. And turns out there were a growing number of students that were interested in that topic, master's students. So I was able to shift my research focus and some of my teaching and community work to Alaska food systems or circumpolar food systems. And now I guess I've served on the Alaska Food Policy Council board for the past 6 years. 4 of those, most recently, I've been co-chair. And in that role, along with my role as a faculty member, we work on everything from advocating for local food policies to increase local food production and processing and value-added activities, to making sure that we have the infrastructure to store and process and ship our locally produced foods, all the way to making sure we have policies in place to help lower income families access nutritious, affordable foods. And then, of course, there's these issues around food safety and emergency preparedness. We have a major port here in Anchorage, for example, and it has fallen into disrepair. And that is also something else that, as a legislator, I'd be turning my attention to, because we import about 95% of our food up here in Alaska. We've got about 3 days worth of food on our shelves should the import be disrupted. And so we need to get on that pretty quick and make sure that this is a world-class port that can support us today, and that we're prepared for a growing economy tomorrow.
Is there anything else that you would like to make sure we talk about?
We touched on education briefly, and I do want to highlight that. I would imagine if you spoke with Alyse Galvin, she had a lot to say about education. I think she and I are probably on the same page on most things. I'm very keen to see us invest in that across the spectrum, everything from pre-K. The studies show the early investment there is so worth it, and we see improved outcomes on down the line in our older students. We just have to be patient and wait for the good to come out of the early investment. K through 12, of course, continued support. On the kids side, we need to make sure classroom sizes are not too large and that students, regardless of how they learn, of course, have access to the resources that they need. And if you talk to teachers, they do get frustrated. You may have already heard that we have a history of pink slipping teachers at the end of the year because we haven't passed a budget. And that is certainly no way to keep dedicated quality teachers in our school system. In fact, we have teachers back to work this year without a contract because they've not come to an agreement on contract and they're still back to work. So those things we have to stop that. We were excited that we forward funded education for 2 years this past session, and it's great, but frankly, that's not something to celebrate. That should just be par for the course, and we need to be talking about what we can do to excel. And then lastly, highlighting, we have a great university system here, but it could do so much more. The potential is so great, particularly around circumpolar issues. And then vocational training. I would love to see an increase in vocational training. So we're really preparing a diverse workforce as we're figuring out who Alaska wants to be, who we should be in the next 5, 10, 50 years.
If our listeners would like to help support your campaign, how can they do that?
Yes. I should say I am proud to say we have maxed out on out-of-state donations. There is a limit on that here in Alaska Races. But if you are in state and would like to donate, I would be very appreciative. And you can find more at electlizsnyder.com. And you can always follow me on Facebook.
All right. Excellent. Well, Liz, thanks so much for talking with me. This has been really fun. And I am so excited to learn more about Alaska and that it's actually not nearly as Republican as I thought it was.
Come visit, Kelly. I'd love to show you around, too. You let us know if you come up here.
I will let you know. I mean, you got a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old boy. I can bring my boys and they'll be right at home.
Fantastic. We'll be ready.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Liz.
Thank you, Kelly. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast.